Hey, welcome back! Today we will again be discussing the topic of page transitions. However, this time I am actually way more excited than I used to be about the other videos, because today we will be discussing a solution that you can use for any JavaScript framework. Today we will be discussing the View Transition API. And this new API gives you the option to create amazing page transitions without the need of a lot of JavaScript and also without the need of adding additional libraries. Of course, this is a new API, so it's right now limited to a few browsers, but expect support to be rolling out pretty soon to all of the major browsers. So you better learn right now how this works so you can use it right away. First, let's have a quick look what we're gonna build, and then we will start right away. For this example, I created a pretty basic block type page where you have an article overview page, and there you can click on an article and go to the detail page. If you click this article, you already see the animation happening. We go back to home, you see that the image moves back into place and that also the title moves up. And next to that, if you take a look at the line underneath MagSafe, it moves back to home when I click to the other page. Of course, it doesn't make sense to have the article link in the main navigation as well, but this way I can show you both of the animations at the same time. And let me tell you, I did not specify how this animation should move the title from its position to the top left when you go to the detail page. All of that is pretty much done by the web API. So let's dive in right away and see how we can replicate this ourselves. So for this example, I decided to build a Vite project that is using plain JavaScript or TypeScript and has two HTML pages that are styled with Tailwind. First, you have the homepage that's located in the index.html. In there, you see the HTML that represents this page. And next to that, there is also an articles and then magsafe.html, which is actually the second page. Next to that, you also find a source directory. There are some type definitions I had to do to make TypeScript happy as well. But the main interesting thing is the main.cs, to which we will be adding our code in a minute, and to other animation files that are all still empty, but that we will also use in a second. And if we look at the HTML of this page, it's pretty much basic HTML. There is nothing special in this page. It just runs out all the different HTML elements, and at the bottom of the page, we include our JavaScript file. Vite also makes sure that this is bundled and converted into JavaScript so the browser can use it, and that it also injects the style sheet. But apart from that, this could also be HTML and JavaScript that's just returned from your WordPress website even. First, let me start up the dev server of this version of the code, so we can go back and see that we don't have any animations. So the first thing we have to do in order to add in these animations is listen to a navigate event. So that way, as soon as the user tries to navigate somewhere, we can do something with that data. So let's go to our main TypeScript file. And in here, we're gonna listen to a new event called window.navigation at event listener navigate. And that event will give us a navigate event. And with that navigate event, we can do a few things. The first thing is it gives us a destination. And that destination is actually the URL the user tries to navigate to. So we can get this URL, for example, call it next URL, and then we put it in a new URL, because that way we get a fresh clone of the navigation URL, and anything we do or manipulate with it will not have a reference to the event. And next to the next URL, we also have a way to get the current URL. You could, of course, use window.location.origin. However, that kind of could break because we are currently in the middle of transitioning to a new page. So instead of using the window location, there's actually a way to get current URL, which uses new URL, and then on the new window.navigation object, there is actually a current entry property, which potentially is undefined, and that also has a URL. And because we need to pass in a string into new URL, we will default to an empty string. But as far as I'm aware, this current entry is actually always defined. So for now, we will stick with this or situation. And if we then add a console.log next URL.pathname and current URL.pathname, and then we click preserve log in our console, and we go to a new page, we see that we get two values. The next URL is the page we're trying to visit, and the slash is the current URL we were at before we navigated away. Now we have these two values. There is another super interesting thing this navigate event now gives us. And that is a function called Intercept. And that intercept function that takes in an object that has an async handler function. And in there, we can do something with the fact that the user is navigating away. And what we are going to do here is actually fetch the content of the new page, because that's actually what the browser was about to do, but we are gonna intercept that right now. And after we did that, we are gonna animate between these two styles. So for that, I wrote a very small function that can get the page's content. What this function does, the get new content function, is it does a fetch to a URL that we supply. Then it converts it to text data, and then it uses a small regex to only take out the main element. So if we go to the HTML page, you see that it takes out this main portion that includes the header and all of the content. So we could now use that function to get the data, or actually the HTML of the next page. So we could say const content equals await get new content and insert the next URL. So this will then do an API call to get the page's content. And once we have that, we can say const main is document.querySelector main. Then we get a reference to the current main tag of the page. And then we could say if main, then we set main.inner HTML equals content, or an empty string, because in theory it could be that we didn't get any content. You could decide to handle that in any other way. You could add some default content, maybe a 404, or do a hard refresh, something like that. But for now, we will replace it with an empty string. But if we do that, and we now go from the MagSafe page back to the home page, the page switches. But there is no navigation happening. It's really replacing it with the content we gave. So I can prove that by just making this string, adding in test there, and then we go from the home page to the MagSafe page, and test is added. Nothing too fancy yet, right? However, there's one small thing we're missing, and that will actually suddenly enable all of the animation magic. So let's add back the content. And what we then still need to do is wrap this replacing of the HTML inside document.startViewTransition. That accepts a function. And in that function, we do the replacing of the HTML. So if I refresh the page, and we now go from the detail page to the home page, you see that suddenly there's a fade happening. And why is that fade happening? That's all because we are calling this start view transition. That function is making sure that it animates from one document, you could say, to the other document. So the browser is fully handling everything that has to do with animating from one view to the other view. And perhaps this is already everything you want, right? This is already a nice transition. And from here, we can start doing a few more things. First, we can go to our style sheet, and you see that I already prepared a little bit, because what it will do is it will add two new pseudo elements, a view transition new as well as old, and that takes in another selector, you could say. A root is a default, that's the full page, and in there you can define your own custom animation. So what I did here is I added a new animation that actually calls a move up keyframe animation. And that does a translate Y and an opacity fade. So this actually now replaces the default fade animation the browser does. So if we save this, and then we go from one page to the other, you suddenly see that everything moves up. But for now, I will switch back to the opacity fade. And the reason for that is because I think it fits in better with the other animations we're gonna add. First, I want to move this line. And let me tell you, it's pretty easy if you know how it works. Let me show you how it works. First, what I did to have this underline is I added a span. And that span is actually a line. That span is added to the home page for the home page, and on the MagSafe page, we have the span in the other anchor. And the reason that I'm not doing this as a pseudo element is because that way we can move this element from one place to another. Or the browser will do all the work. I love being a lazy developer. And how do we tell the browser to do that work? Well, the only thing you need to do is use a new CSS property for that. Let me first start with adding an inline style and then showing you how you could do that in Tailwind as well. You can add a style, and the only thing we then need to do is use a property called view transition name equals active nav, for example. And then we need to copy this into our other file as well. So both of these lines have the same name. Give a quick refresh. And you already see that this line moves and that it also scales up. And that's the only thing we needed to do. We just had to make sure that both of these elements have the exact same name and the browser will do the rest. I could use this active nav name also in my style sheet as well, where you could add, instead of root, you could put active nav, and then you could tweak this animation and do anything you like with it. So you could even fully customize it. But letting the browser do its work is already super nice. Now, if you're using Tailwind, you don't need to use these inline styles, but you can use an arbitrary value to actually define exactly the same thing. The way that works with properties that Tailwind does not support is you add square brackets, and then you can write view transition name colon active nav. And if we copy this class name also to the other page, we see that we have the same result because Tailwind is now adding the exact same class name. Like you can see if we inspect this anchor, you see that Tailwind is doing exactly the same thing for us now. Okay, so now let's also animate this card. That will be a little bit more complicated. You might be thinking, okay, nice. I'm gonna add this view transition name to all of the titles in this block, and then it will automatically animate from one to the other. Sadly, that won't work because then it would try to animate all of them to one because all of them have exactly the same name. So for this, there's actually two options. The first option would be to create a view transition name that also, for example, contains the article ID. So you could, for example, if we go to this H2, we could add, and then we can't use Tailwind, by the way, because if you create an arbitrary value, you cannot use some sort of variable or something that's server-side generated, then it will not generate these classes. So you could, for example, add the view transition name and make it article title, and then, for example, add the ID, which could be 123. And if you would add that to the detail title as well, that could be this H1. It totally does not matter that it's a different type of element. The browser will just do the work for you. And in that case, as soon as you click to the detail page, you already see that this title animates. So this could be your go-to solution. As long as you generate dynamic variables, then you're good to go. You can also add a custom transition name to the image. It should not contain title then, but be unique as well. So probably article image. Then that animates as well. But in case you do not have the control to add all of those dynamic attributes, I will also show you a slightly more complicated version that actually does all of this automatically for you. So first, let's remove these custom names. And then we're gonna slightly extend our JavaScript. The first thing I still want to do, by the way, is add in another small helper function I wrote. And that function is called should-not-intercept. Because when we're navigating, there's a few things we don't or can't transition to. And if we try to intercept them, probably things will break because it just won't work. So a few things are, if we go to a different origin, then we cannot animate this, so it should not intercept. Or for example, if we're having form data, then we're doing a post or triggering a download request. All of those things are things that you do not want to intercept. So that's still something you need to manually check if you're using this new navigate function. So that's why I wrote this function to not intercept these things. So in order for that to work, it's important to add a if should not intercept and then add in the navigate event. And if that's true, we should return. And in that case, the browser will simply continue its normal behavior and will do whatever it thinks it should do. As long as you don't call navigate.intercept, then it will just stop and continue doing what it was trying to do. So navigating to the page. So now that's also added in. Let's finally start adding in the animation of the image and the title. And for that, we are going to use these two animations files. The first one, I'm going to add a function called Animate to home. And in the other file, we are going to add a function called Animate to article page. And then inside our intercept function, we are going to use one or the other function. And deciding which function to run is something we can do by checking nexturl.pathname.index of articles is -1. Because if that's the case, we should animate to home. Let me quickly change the casing just for my OCD. And else we are animating to the article page. Let's first see what should happen if we animate to an article page. So if we go to this function, one thing we need to do is get a reference to our main element, which we can do by running the query selector again. And the other thing we also need to do is we need to know what element has been clicked. Because this element or the title and the image need to get this view transition name. And we can actually find this out by also running a query selector. We can create a new variable called clicked article that is document.querySelector. And in there we target a card, and that card is any of those cards which has inside an anchor that has an href attribute, and that should equal our URL we are actually going to. So I'm going to add backticks in here. So this way we can add in the article path. And of course, we still need to add in this article path to the function. But as soon as we do that, we can get a reference to the anchor of this card. And it would be even better if we would get a reference to this card itself. So we can do that by traversing up again back until the card. Because this way we can use the card element to later on query the title and the image as well. So if we go back to our main and then add in the article URL, which is part of the nexturl.pathname, then as soon as we run this query, that query will result in the card element of the thing we just clicked. Of course, both of them could be undefined, so like Copilot is suggesting again, we need to check if any of them is undefined. If so, we just don't do anything, so no animation will run. This is just a fail-safe because it shouldn't happen because they are on the page, but we have to check it, otherwise TypeScript gets mad for valid reasons. And as soon as we do that, we can create two more variables called card title, which is a clicked article .query selector h2. And if we have a card title, we can say card title.style.view transition name is article title. And we can do exactly the same for the image by defining card image and querying for the image. Oh, I replaced a little bit too much. And this will then add the view transition name to both the title and the image of the card we just clicked. Two more things we still need to do is update the inner HTML of the main. So in there, we want to add content, which is something we still need to get. So we need to pass that into our function. Content or an empty string, so we don't need to check everywhere. Then we can add that in as an argument to our function, content, which is a string. And then another nice thing to do is also add document.document.element.scrollTop equals 0. So that way you go back to the top of the page instead of staying somewhere halfway if you were halfway. And then to complete the magic, we still need to add this view transition around the changes we are making. So I'm going to copy this view transition in and add that around everything. Then I'm going to delete this view transition in our main code because that's not applicable anymore. And if we then go from the overview page to the detail page, there's nothing happening yet. And the reason for that is because on the detail page, we still do not set these view transition names. I also see that I have two names that are the same. One should of course be article image. But if we then go back to our detail page, we can add view transition name, article title, and we can also do the same on the image and make that article image. And if we then go back to the home page and then go to the detail page, it's still not working. Oh, and that is because I made one mistake. We should actually add these attributes before we start a view transition. And the reason for that is a very important one, because as soon as you start a transition, anything you want to change in the old page should already be applied. So if we want to add these view transition names, that should already be added before we start a transition. So if we retry this and we click to the detail page now, we see that this animation works. And it does work because, and we can check that by disabling the replacement of the HTML, going back to the home page. And if we then click this title and inspect it, we see that it sets the view transition name, and it does so only on this card. So the only thing we still need to do to make this work is also make it work when we go back to the home page. For that, the code is quite similar, but slightly different. Let me just quickly copy that code in and then talk you through it. So this animate to home function works pretty similar, but just a bit different. The first thing you see is that again, I nested everything in the start view transition function. And it's not because I made the same mistake twice. Trust me, I rarely do. Right. But to go back here, the reason I do this is because what we need to change now is something in the destination page, because we need to add these attributes in the home page. The article detail page already has them. So what we do here is we first, inside the view transition, query select for the main element. Then we already update the inner HTML, so we are setting the new content, which is something on the article page, which we did as the very last step. And after that, we are again querying for the article card based on the path. If so, we set the right transition names, which should actually be article title and article image. And we also set the scroll top. The only thing we still need to do is add the correct arguments to the animate to home function. First argument is the article path. That is this time not the next URL, but it's actually the current URL because we are coming from the article page. So we are adding the current URL dot path name, and then we're also supplying the content. And if we now click back to the home page, we see that it animates into place. And I don't know about you, but I'm really happy with the way we can define these animations, or actually the way we don't have to define them. It just works. As long as those two elements have exactly the same names in different views, the browser does the rest. And that's so amazing. That's how animation should be. It's something we add on top to make things a bit more beautiful, but it should also be pretty easy to add. And in my opinion, this new View Transition API is that accessible. Because with fairly little code, and especially if you're able to create dynamic view transition names based on IDs or something like that, then it's so easy and so little code to add while still adding so much value. And with that, we pretty much came to the end of this video. The final thing I still wanted to discuss is that in the beginning I said this is not working with Next.js. And that has a few reasons. First, Next.js is just really advanced. Every page has its own JavaScript that gets injected. They have custom link components that have click handlers. If you click on them, they also prefetch stuff. So it's way more complicated to know where to hook into everything Next.js does. You will probably be fighting with Next.js to do this transition because Next.js also tries to move to a different page when you click an anchor. As for those script tags, you could, instead of only updating the main tag, also query for the script tags, for example, and replace those, but it starts to become a little bit more complicated. So for now, I think this View Transition API, and that's also what's written in the docs, is mainly for more static sites or even single-page applications, but not for things that have complicated server-side frameworks that also try to control a lot of JavaScript things. So in my opinion, this time it is a win for the more basic JavaScript frameworks or even just all of the simple CMS websites. And that was long overdue because there are so many great CMS websites out there that absolutely would benefit from transitions like this. So in my opinion, this is a really great addition and I'm really looking forward to using this in products and adding animations with little to no effort. I hope you got just as enthusiastic about this as I am. These are the things that bring so much joy to Frontend. Making websites just look nice. That's what this profession is all about. Or partially at least. Don't forget things like accessibility and performance, for example. Like always, I also created a GitHub repository where you can find this code. That's also linked down below in the description. And I would appreciate it a lot if you would subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, tell me what you liked, what you didn't, where you're using this yourself. And maybe I will even see you around in my Discord, which is also linked below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.